The rain began before dawn, soft at first, then heavier as the black cars started lining the long iron gates of the Ashford estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. By 9 in the morning, the private chapel behind the mansion was glowing with white lilies, polished wood, and candlelight. Reporters stood beyond the gates with umbrellas bent in the wind. Inside, senators, bankers, hospital board members, pastors, and old family friends whispered about the greatness of Harrison Ashford Sr. They called him a builder, a philanthropist, a father to the community. No one mentioned the people who had washed his sheets, carried his meals, and heard his regrets when the cameras were gone. Mrs. Elsie Whittaker stood at the side entrance with one hand on the brass door handle and the other pressed against the worn cloth bag hanging from her arm. She was 74 years old, small, stooped, and dressed in the only black coat she owned. The sleeves were shiny from age. Her shoes were clean but cracked at the edges. A few guests glanced at her as they passed, then looked away with the quick politeness reserved for servants, janitors, and old women nobody expected to matter. Elsie had served the Ashford family for more than 40 years. She had polished the silver in that house before Preston Ashford was even born. She had changed flowers in Meredith Ashford's bedroom after every charity gala. She had sat by Harrison's bed during long winter nights when his breathing grew thin, and the mansion felt too large for one dying man. Still, no invitation had come for her. She had not expected one. She had come for the letter. 20 years earlier, in the back kitchen of the same mansion, Harrison Ashford had placed that letter in her hands. It had been past midnight. Rain had tapped against the windows. The rest of the family slept upstairs, or pretended to. Harrison had just survived a minor stroke, and Meredith had begun controlling his calls, his doctors, his visitors, even the papers he was allowed to sign. Elsie remembered his hand. It had trembled so badly that she had to hold the envelope for him. "If I die before I make this right," he had whispered, "take this to whoever opens my will." "Mr. Harrison," Elsie had said, frightened by the fear in his eyes. "Why not give it to your lawyer now?" He had looked toward the hall, where a shadow had moved and vanished. "Because she watches everything," he said. "And because I was a coward for too long." Elsie had not understood all of it then. She only knew there had been a woman named Naomi Brooks, a baby girl, and a silence so heavy it seemed to rot the walls of the mansion from the inside. Harrison had closed his weak fingers around Elsie's wrist. "Do not let them turn the truth into something that never existed." That sentence had followed Elsie for 20 years. She had kept the letter wrapped in plastic, hidden where no Ashford hand could find it. She had prayed over it, feared it, hated it some nights. But she had never destroyed it. That morning, she had read Harrison's obituary in the local paper. It said he had passed peacefully, surrounded by his beloved wife Meredith and his only lawful children. Only lawful children. Elsie had read that line 3 times before her knees began to shake. Now she stepped into the chapel. At the front of the room, Harrison's closed casket rested beneath a mountain of white roses. His portrait stood beside it, smiling in the practiced way wealthy men smiled for magazine covers. Meredith Ashford sat in the first pew, draped in black silk, her silver hair pinned perfectly beneath a small veil. Preston stood near her, tall, handsome, and cold, shaking hands like a man already accepting power. Elsie moved slowly down the side aisle, trying not to draw attention. She only needed to reach Daniel Pierce, Harrison's estate attorney, who stood near the front speaking quietly with a judge. Her cloth bag brushed against the pews. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. Then Meredith saw her. For 1 second, the widow's face changed. The grief slipped. Something sharper appeared underneath. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. Meredith rose. The murmurs faded as she crossed the chapel. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She placed a gloved hand gently on Elsie's shoulder, as if comforting a confused old woman. "Elsie," she said, soft enough to sound kind and loud enough to be heard. "Today is for family." Elsie swallowed. Mrs. Ashford, I only need to speak with Mr. Pierce. Meredith's fingers tightened. The staff entrance is behind the kitchen. You know that. A few people turned. Elsie felt heat rise in her face. I am not here as staff. Meredith smiled sadly. Then I am afraid I do not know why you are here. Elsie touched the bag. I made a promise to Mr. Harrison. At the sound of his father's name, Preston stepped forward. What promise? Elsie looked past him toward the lawyer. I have a letter. The words seemed to strike Meredith like a slap, though her face barely moved. Preston reached for the bag. Elsie pulled back. Do not touch it, she said. That was all it took. Preston grabbed her wrist. What are you carrying? Please, Elsie said. It is not yours. The bag slipped from her arm and fell open on the marble floor. A pill bottle rolled beneath a pew. A folded handkerchief landed near Meredith's shoe. A torn half-photograph slid out next. Then the yellowed envelope, sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. Preston bent and snatched it up before Elsie could reach it. The chapel went silent. Across the front of the envelope, in Harrison Ashford's unmistakable handwriting, were 5 words. For my daughter, Amara. Someone gasped. Meredith's lips parted. For the first time that morning, she looked less like a grieving widow and more like a woman seeing a grave open beneath her feet. Elsie reached out. Please give it back. Preston stared at the envelope, then at Elsie's old coat, her wet shoes, her trembling hands. Slowly, his expression hardened. You brought this to my father's funeral? He said. I brought what he asked me to protect. No, Preston said, turning so the room could hear him. You brought stolen private papers into a family service. Elsie shook her head. I did not steal anything. Meredith lowered her eyes as if wounded by Elsie's betrayal. Oh, Elsie, after everything this family did for you. The guests began whispering again. At the back of the chapel, Samuel Reed, the former Ashford driver, stood frozen beside a pillar. His face had gone pale. He had seen that handwriting before. He had heard the name Amara once, 20 years ago, from a young mother crying in the back seat of a car. But Samuel did not move. Preston lifted his hand. 2 security guards came down the aisle. Elsie clutched the edge of the pew. Mr. Pierce needs to see that letter. Preston leaned close, his voice low and cruel. The only thing anyone needs to see is what happens when a servant forgets her place. The guards took Elsie by both arms. As they dragged her backward through the chapel, her shoes scraped against the marble. The candles flickered. No one stood up. No one told them to stop. Elsie kept her eyes on the envelope in Preston's hand. Then Meredith whispered, almost tenderly, "Take her out before she embarrasses herself further." The chapel doors opened behind Elsie, and cold rain blew in. Just before they pulled her outside, she saw Samuel Reed at the back of the room, looking at her with terror and shame. Elsie understood then. She had not been the only one who knew. The moment the chapel doors opened, the cold rain struck Elsie Whittaker across the face. For a second, she could not breathe. One security guard held her left arm. The other gripped her right so tightly that pain shot through her shoulder. Her shoes slipped on the wet stone steps. And if one of the guards had not been holding her, she would have fallen in front of everyone. Behind her, inside the chapel, the funeral music continued. Soft organ notes floated into the rain as if nothing shameful had happened. Outside the iron gates, reporters turned their cameras toward the commotion. "Mrs. Whittaker," one of them called. "Were you removed from the service?" Another shouted, "Did you try to present a claim against the Ashford estate?" Elsie lowered her head. Her grey hair had come loose from its pins. Rain ran down her cheeks, mixing with the tears she had tried not to shed. She did not cry because they had dragged her out. She cried because Harrison's letter was still in Preston's hand. And inside that chapel, the first truth about Amara had already been twisted into a crime. The guards pulled her under the stone arch beside the service entrance. A black SUV idled nearby. Preston Ashford came out moments later, sheltered by an assistant holding an umbrella. Meredith followed behind him, moving carefully, as though the rain itself should apologize before touching her. Preston still held the envelope in a clear plastic sleeve. "Give it back," Elsie said, her voice thin but steady. Preston looked down at her as if she was something tracked in from the mud. "You do not give orders here. That letter was entrusted to me." Meredith let out a soft sigh. "Elsie, please, do not make this uglier than it already is." Elsie stared at the woman she had served for decades. She remembered warming Meredith's tea after charity dinners. She remembered laying out black dresses for galas where Meredith spoke about compassion. She remembered Meredith asking for fresh towels without ever saying thank you. "It is already ugly," Elsie said. "You made it that way." For the first time, Meredith's eyes hardened. Preston stepped closer. "You walked into my father's funeral with stolen private papers and a story about some mystery daughter. Do you understand what that looks like? It looks like a promise being kept." "No," Preston said. "It looks like extortion." The word landed harder than the rain. A few guests had gathered just inside the chapel entrance, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Elsie saw their faces through the open door. Some looked shocked, others looked disgusted. Most looked relieved that the disgrace belonged to someone beneath them. Meredith turned slightly so the people inside could hear her. Her voice softened into something almost tender. "I do not blame her," she said. "She is old. She has been lonely for years. People in that condition can become confused about their place in a household." Elsie flinched. Her place. 40 years in that mansion, and still, that was all they saw. A place, a uniform, a pair of hands. Someone to stand in the kitchen while the family sat beneath chandeliers and spoke about legacy. "I am not confused," Elsie said. Preston laughed once, without humor. "Then you are greedy." A reporter near the gate lifted a camera. The flash went off before Elsie could turn away. In that frozen instant, she knew what the picture would show. Not Preston's hand around the stolen envelope, not Meredith's cold eyes. Only an old black woman in a soaked coat, standing outside a billionaire's funeral with security guards on either side of her. By noon, that picture would have a headline. Preston handed the envelope to his assistant. "Have legal. Secure this." Elsie's eyes followed it. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself not to reach for it. Harrison had warned her. If they ever found one copy, they would think they had won. They did not know about the original. They did not know about the plastic-wrapped letter hidden far from the estate, folded inside the old Bible Naomi Brooks had once placed in Elsie's hands. Meredith stepped closer. "Elsie, go home. Rest. When emotions calm down, we may be able to discuss your situation quietly." "My situation?" "The cottage," Meredith said. "Your medical support, your access to the property. All of that was extended out of kindness." Elsie stared at her. "I worked for that house for 40 years. "And you were paid," Meredith replied. No anger, no shouting. Just a smooth, polished cruelty that cut deeper because it sounded almost reasonable. Preston nodded toward the guards. "Escort her off the grounds." They did not let Elsie return through the staff hallway to collect her coat scarf or the small pair of gloves she had left near the kitchen. They walked her down the side path, past the hydrangeas she had trimmed for years, past the kitchen windows where younger maids now watched with frightened eyes. At the gate, one guard released her and said, "You cannot come back without written permission." "I live in the East Cottage," Elsie said. "Not anymore," he answered. The gate closed behind her with a heavy metal click. Elsie stood on the roadside in the rain, holding her empty cloth bag against her chest. Cars rolled past, their tinted windows hiding faces she had served coffee to only an hour earlier. No one stopped. By afternoon, the story had spread online. Former Ashford housekeeper removed from funeral after alleged estate disruption. By evening, a property manager called. His voice was embarrassed but firm. Mrs. Whittaker had 24 hours to collect her belongings from the East Cottage. Security would supervise. Her healthcare assistance, arranged through the Ashford family office, had been suspended pending review. Her final wages would be mailed. Elsie sat on a bench at the bus station while the message played for the second time. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Then another message arrived. Unknown number. You still have the real one, don't you? Elsie stopped breathing. A second message appeared. Burn it before midnight if you want a bed to sleep in when you are old. The bus station lights buzzed overhead. A young mother nearby pulled her child closer. Not out of cruelty. Only because Elsie looked like trouble now. That was how quickly a life of service could be turned into suspicion. One rich man's son said thief, and the world began checking its pockets. Elsie finally stood and took the late bus to the small room she rented from an old church friend whenever winter storms made the cottage pipes freeze. She had not planned to sleep there that night. She had not planned to lose the only home she had left. When she reached the narrow brick building, the hallway smelled of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand pressed to her chest. Her door was not fully closed. Elsie froze. The cheap lock hung crooked from the frame. Inside, the lamp had been knocked over. Her drawer was open. Clothes lay on the floor. The little tin sewing box she kept beneath the bed was gone. For a moment, she could not move. That box held more than needles and thread. It held her daughter's hospital bracelet, her husband's old ring, receipts from a life nobody in the Ashford family believed mattered. And it was where anyone searching for a secret would expect an old woman to hide one. Elsie stepped into the room, rain dripping from her coat onto the floor. Someone had been there before her. Someone believed they had taken the truth. Elsie Whittaker stood in the middle of the small rented room and stared at the broken lock as if it were a wound. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. It belonged to an old church friend who let Elsie use it during winter storms or when the pipes froze in the east cottage. That morning, it had been a spare room. By nightfall, it had become the only place she had left. Someone had searched it. Her clothes had been pulled from the drawer and thrown across the floor. The mattress had been lifted. The little tin sewing box was gone from beneath the bed. Elsie lowered herself slowly onto the chair, her wet coat still clinging to her shoulders. Inside that box had been her daughter's hospital bracelet, her late husband's plain gold ring, and a stack of old receipts from a life nobody in the Ashford family thought important enough to remember. It also had been the place a stranger would expect an old woman to hide a secret. But the real letter was not there. Elsie looked toward the small shelf beside the bed. Her old Bible still sat between a chipped mug and a jar of buttons. Its brown cover was cracked, and the pages had gone soft from years of use. Naomi Brooks had given it to her 20 years ago on the last night Elsie ever saw her. "You are the only person in that house who still looks at me like I am human," Naomi had whispered. Elsie's throat tightened at the memory. She reached for the Bible and opened it near the back, where the binding had been carefully loosened. Hidden inside the lining was a plastic-wrapped envelope, yellowed with age but untouched. Harrison's real letter. Elsie pressed it against her chest. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed dry now. The crying had passed. What remained was fear, and beneath the fear, a stubborn flame she had not felt in years. A soft knock came at the damaged door. Elsie froze. "Mrs. Whittaker?" The voice belonged to Claire Ashford-Vale. Elsie did not answer at first. She slipped the letter beneath the thin cushion of the chair and stood. Claire pushed the door open slowly. She wore a dark wool coat, pearls at her throat, and the pale, frightened expression of someone who had spent a lifetime obeying the wrong person. "What are you doing here?" Elsie asked. Claire glanced at the broken lock, then at the scattered clothes. Shame crossed her face, but she did not look surprised. "I came to ask you to stop." Elsie gave a short, bitter laugh. "Your family already took my home, my healthcare, my name, and my keepsakes. What else do you want me to hand over?" Claire stepped inside. "You do not understand what this will do." "To whom?" "To everyone. The company, the foundation, the hospitals, the employees. If this becomes public, It will destroy more than Meredith. Elsie studied her. And what about the child? Claire's lips parted. Elsie took one step closer. What about Naomi's child? Did her life count in your family's math? Claire looked away. That was answer enough. You knew, Elsie said. Claire's eyes filled. I knew there was a baby. I did not know everything, but you knew enough. Claire sank onto the edge of the bed, careful not to touch the clothes on the floor. Naomi came to the house after Harrison's surgery. She was kind, too kind for that place. He loved her, I think. Or he loved how she saw him before the money, and the name swallowed him. She wiped her cheek quickly. When Meredith found out about the baby, everything changed. Elsie's voice dropped. What happened to them? Claire shook her head. I signed something. Meredith said it was only to protect the family from scandal. She said Naomi had accepted money and wanted to leave. I was scared. My children were young. Meredith made it clear that if I refused, I would lose everything. So you let Naomi lose everything instead. Claire flinched as if slapped. Before she could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Claire stood quickly, fear draining the color from her face. Preston Ashford entered without knocking. Two men followed him. One carried a leather folder, the other stood by the door with the stillness of private security. Preston looked around the room with faint amusement. I see you have had a difficult evening. Elsie did not speak. Claire turned on him. Preston, this is not necessary. He ignored her and placed the folder on the small table. Mrs. Whittaker, my family is prepared to be generous. Your family has never been generous, Elsie said. Only careful. His smile faded. $250,000. A private assisted living apartment. Medical coverage for the rest of your life. No lawsuit, no police report, no public statement about theft. The amount filled the room like a dangerous perfume. Elsie thought of the cottage gate closing behind her. She thought of the call suspending her medical help. She thought of winter coming, of her aching knees, of the daughter she had buried because every bill had been larger than her paycheck. Preston opened the folder and slid a document toward her. You will sign a statement saying you were confused by grief, that you misread old household papers, and that there is no hidden Ashford child. Claire whispered, Preston, stop. He leaned toward Elsie. You cleaned our floors for most of your life. Do not embarrass yourself by pretending one old letter puts you at our table. Elsie looked at the paper. For 1 second, she imagined saying yes. A bed, medicine. Heat in winter, no more fear. Then she remembered Naomi in the kitchen, holding a newborn beneath a blue blanket. If anything happens to me, Naomi had whispered, please do not let my daughter believe I sold her. Elsie pushed the document back. I may be poor, she said. I may be old, but I will not sell the truth of someone who trusted me. Preston's face hardened. You will regret that. I already regret many things, Elsie said. Keeping my promise is not one of them. He took the folder, gave Claire a look of disgust, and left with the two men. Only after the hallway went silent did Elsie pull the letter from beneath the cushion. Claire stared at it as if seeing a ghost. Elsie broke the old seal with shaking fingers and read past the first page. There, in Harrison's handwriting, were 3 details she had never noticed before. A birth record number from Street, Agnes Hospital in Baltimore, the initials AB Trust, and a date from 20 years ago. Elsie called the hospital from her old phone. It took 3 transfers before a tired records clerk answered. Elsie read the number aloud. The line went quiet. Ma'am, the clerk said slowly, where did you get this file number? Elsie gripped the Bible. Why? Because according to our system, that baby died 20 years ago. Elsie could not speak. A loud knock struck the broken door. Then a man's voice called from the hallway. Mrs. Whittaker, we are here on behalf of the Ashford family's attorneys. You are required to surrender all documents connected to Harrison Ashford immediately. The Ashford mansion had never felt quiet to Meredith Ashford. Even on nights when every guest had gone and every servant had disappeared behind the kitchen stairs, the house seemed to breathe with old money. Marble floors held echoes. Portraits watched from gold frames. Doors closed softly, not because they were gentle, but because everything in that house had been built to hide noise. That evening, after Harrison's funeral, the silence felt different. It felt dangerous. Meredith stood in Harrison's private study, still wearing her black silk dress. Her veil lay on the desk beside a crystal glass she had not touched. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Beyond them, the lawn rolled into darkness, perfect and cold. Preston paced in front of the fireplace, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing every few minutes with messages from board members, reporters, and family advisors. "She is one old woman," he said, "one old housekeeper with a story. We are acting like she walked in with a federal warrant." Meredith turned slowly. Preston had seen that look before. It was the look she had used when he was 9 and embarrassed her at a charity dinner. The look she had used when a young executive questioned her control of the foundation. The look that said disappointment was more frightening than anger. "You let her leave," Meredith said. Preston stopped pacing. "Security removed her. With what she wanted us to find." He frowned. "We took the envelope." Meredith laughed once, softly. "You took an envelope, Preston. Do not confuse that with taking the truth." His face darkened. "You think she has another copy?" "I think Harrison was weak, guilty, and sentimental. Men like that always make duplicates of their shame." Preston looked toward the desk, where the yellowed envelope had been placed inside a locked evidence pouch by the family attorney. The name on it seemed to glow in his mind. Amara. He hated the sound of it already. "Who is she?" he asked. Meredith did not answer at once. She walked to Harrison's shelves, where leather-bound books stood in perfect rows. Her fingers brushed the spine of an old medical philanthropy award from St. Agnes Hospital in Baltimore. "That name should have stayed buried," she said. Preston's impatience broke. "Mother," Meredith faced him. 20 years ago, your father had an attachment to a nurse." "A nurse?" "Naomi Brooks. She cared for him after his heart surgery. She was young, quiet, and very good at pretending she wanted nothing." Preston heard the disgust under the polished words. "Did he love her?" Meredith's mouth tightened. "Your father loved being seen as a man instead of a name." Naomi gave him that illusion. "And the child?" Meredith looked toward the rain. There was a baby girl. For the first time that day, Preston felt the room shift beneath him. He had expected a scandal, perhaps an affair, perhaps a woman who had taken money and vanished. A child was different. A child meant blood. Blood meant inheritance. Inheritance meant control. Was she his? Meredith's silence answered. Preston swore under his breath and turned away. Meredith snapped, "Do not lose your composure." "My composure? I am 3 weeks from taking the CEO vote. The Harbor Residence's financing depends on the estate transition staying clean. If some woman appears with a blood claim, the banks will reopen everything." "I know." "No, you do not. The lenders are already nervous. If the trust assets freeze, if the board delays the succession, if the press smells uncertainty, the project collapses." Meredith stepped closer. "Then you understand why Elsie Whittaker must become the story, not the girl." Preston looked at her. Meredith's voice became calm again, which meant she had already decided what to do. "Elsie is old, poor, recently removed from family housing. She has medical bills. She entered a private funeral uninvited with documents she had no right to possess. That is what the world will hear. And if she has the original letter, then we attack the person holding it before anyone studies the paper." Preston nodded slowly. He could see the shape of it now. Confusion, grief, financial desperation. A former employee trying to exploit a mourning family. People would believe it, because people always believed wealth came with order and poverty came with desperation. "What about Daniel Pierce?" he asked. "Daniel is careful. He will not move without verification. We make sure there is nothing left to verify." Preston looked sharply at her. "What does that mean?" Meredith walked to the desk and opened a drawer. Inside lay a slim black address book, old enough that most people would have thrown it away. Meredith had never thrown away anything that could still serve her. When Naomi left Connecticut, certain documents were corrected. Corrected? Do not pretend you are too innocent for this conversation. Preston said nothing. Meredith turned the pages. A birth record, a hospital transfer note, a trust designation your father tried to create behind my back. It was contained. Contained by whom? People who understood the cost of scandal. The study door was not fully closed. In the hallway outside, Claire Ashford Vale stood with one hand pressed over her mouth. She had come to return a condolence card left in Harrison's sitting room. She had not meant to listen, but the name Naomi Brooks had stopped her where she stood. 20 years vanished. She saw Naomi in the upstairs hall, pale and frightened, holding a blue blanket against her chest. She saw Meredith's lawyer placing papers on a table. She saw her own hand signing a statement she had never fully read because Meredith had said, very quietly, that Claire's children could lose everything if she caused trouble. Inside the study, Preston said, "And if Claire talks?" Meredith's eyes moved toward the door, though Claire could not tell if she had been seen. Claire has lived comfortably for 20 years because she knows when to be silent. Claire's knees weakened. Preston exhaled. "What do you want me to do?" "Have legal prepare a theft and extortion complaint. Not filed yet, only ready. Leak that Elsie was caught with stolen documents. Suspend every benefit she ever received from us. Make her look unstable before she can look brave." "And the Baltimore records?" Meredith found the number she wanted in the black book. "I will handle Baltimore." She picked up the phone on Harrison's desk. For a moment, her reflection appeared in the dark window. Black dress, silver hair, dry eyes. The call rang 4 times. A man answered, older now, but Meredith recognized the voice. "It is Meredith Ashford," she said. "I need to know whether the Street Agnes file still exists." There was a long pause. "Meredith," the man said, "we buried that 20 years ago." Meredith looked at Preston. "Then bury it deeper." Outside the study, Claire backed away, shaking. From inside her purse, she pulled out a worn photograph she had kept hidden for 2 decades. Naomi Brooks stood in the garden, holding a baby wrapped in blue. On the back was one word, Amara. By morning, Elsie Whittaker had slept less than an hour. The broken lock on the rented room had been pushed back into place with a chair. Her old Bible lay open on her lap. Inside it, wrapped in plastic and hidden beneath loose binding, was Harrison Ashford's real letter. Every time she looked at it, she felt the weight of 20 years pressing against her chest. The men from the Ashford attorneys had left angry the night before. Elsie had handed them nothing but a tired stare and a warning that they could speak to Daniel Pierce if they wanted anything more. She did not know whether that had been brave or foolish. Before sunrise, she walked 4 blocks through cold drizzle to a small church where a secretary named Miss Ruth still remembered her from Sunday service years ago. Elsie asked to use the copier and scanner. Miss Ruth saw the bruises on Elsie's wrist and did not ask questions. Elsie scanned every page of Harrison's letter, the front of the envelope, the back of the envelope, the hospital record number, and the words A, B, Trust, written in Harrison's trembling hand. Then she asked Miss Ruth to email the scans to Daniel Pierce's law office. "Are you in trouble, Elsie?" Miss Ruth asked softly. Elsie folded the letter back into the Bible. "No, baby. Trouble finally found the people who made it." By 8 o'clock, Elsie was on a bus headed toward Baltimore. The ride was long, gray, and painful. Her knees ached. Her chest felt tight whenever the bus rattled over rough patches of highway. She kept one hand on the Bible inside her bag and the other wrapped around the half photograph of Naomi Brooks holding a baby in a blue blanket. 20 years ago, Naomi had stood in the Ashford kitchen with that same baby in her arms. Her eyes had been red from crying, but her voice had been steady. "If anything happens to me," Naomi had whispered, Please do not let my daughter think I sold her." Elsie had not understood then how completely a rich family could erase a poor woman. Now she did. The clinic in Baltimore was tucked between a pharmacy and a laundromat, its front windows covered with flyers about flu shots, blood pressure screenings, and free transportation for seniors. Elsie stood outside for several minutes before going in. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant and coffee. A young woman in blue scrubs was helping an elderly man fill out insurance forms. She had warm brown skin, dark hair pulled into a low bun, and eyes that seemed older than 20. Elsie knew before anyone said her name. Amara Brooks. The young woman looked up. "Can I help you?" Elsie's voice caught. "I am looking for Amara Brooks." "That is me." Elsie stepped closer. "My name is Elsie Whitaker. I came from Greenwich. I knew your mother." Amara's expression changed at once. The kindness vanished, replaced by caution. "My mother is dead," she said. "I know. Then you should also know I do not talk to strangers about her." Elsie nodded. "I understand." "No, you do not." Amara lowered her voice and glanced toward the patients. "People have shown up before with stories. Family stories, inheritance stories, adoption stories. It always ends with someone asking for money or paperwork. I am not asking you for anything." "Then why are you here?" Elsie took the half photograph from her bag and held it out. Amara stared at it. For a moment, she did not move. Then she took it with shaking fingers. Her face lost color. "Where did you get this?" "Your mother gave it to me before she left Connecticut." Amara stepped back from the desk. "Wait here." She disappeared through a side door. Elsie stood in the waiting room while a wall clock ticked above her head. Every second felt like judgment. When Amara returned, she was carrying a small metal box. She opened it on the counter and pulled out another torn piece of photograph. The two halves fit perfectly. Naomi Brooks stood in a garden behind the Ashford mansion, holding her baby close to her heart. On the back of Amara's half, written in faded ink, were words that made Elsie cover her mouth. "If one day you hear the name Ashford, do not believe I sold you. I was just not strong enough to fight them." Amara read the words again, as if they might change. Her eyes filled, but anger came before tears. "Why now?" Elsie did not pretend not to understand. "Because Harrison Ashford died. So everyone waited until the rich man died to decide I deserved the truth?" Elsie absorbed the blow because it was fair. "I made a promise," she said. "He told me to give the letter to the person opening his will if he died before making things right. I thought he would find courage. He never did." Amara laughed once, broken and bitter. "So my whole life was a secret because he was afraid?" "Yes," Elsie whispered, "and because others were cruel." Amara pressed her hand against the counter. "Did my mother know who my father was?" "Yes." "Did she want me?" Elsie's eyes filled. "More than anything in this world." That was when the bell above the clinic door rang. An old man stepped inside, soaked from the rain, his cap in his hands. Elsie turned and went still. Samuel Reed. He looked smaller than he had at the funeral, as if shame had bent his back overnight. "I followed the news," he said. "Then I followed my conscience." Elsie stared at him. "You saw them take me out." "I did." His voice cracked. "And I did nothing." Amara looked between them. "Who is he?" Samuel took a breath. "I was the Ashford driver. 20 years ago, I drove your mother and you away from that house." The room seemed to tilt. Samuel pulled a worn notebook from inside his coat. "I kept the trip log. Date, time, car number, destination. Street Agnes Hospital, Baltimore." Meredith Ashford signed the page herself. Elsie reached for the chair. Amara whispered, "You knew." "I knew enough to be ashamed," Samuel said. "Not enough to understand everything. Or maybe I did, and was too scared to admit it." They agreed to take the letter, the photograph, and Samuel's log to Daniel Pierce. But when they stepped outside, Samuel stopped. His car window had been smashed. The glove compartment hung open. Papers were scattered across the wet seat. Samuel rushed forward, searching with shaking hands. "The log," he said. "It is gone." Elsie felt the world close in again. Then Samuel looked up, tears in his eyes. "I sent a copy to my son years ago," he said, "in case my memory failed me." Elsie's phone rang. Daniel Pierce's voice came through, urgent and low. "Mrs. Whittaker, I received your scans. You and Amara Brooks need to be at the will reading tomorrow, but be prepared. The Ashfords will not let either of you walk in easily." The will reading was held on the top floor of Ashford Coastal Holdings, inside a glass-walled conference room that overlooked Long Island Sound. Everything about the room was designed to make ordinary people feel small. The table was long enough to seat 20. The chairs were black leather. The walls displayed framed photographs of hospitals, senior living centers, charity galas, and luxury buildings carrying the Ashford name. Even the silence felt expensive. Elsie Whittaker stepped out of the elevator with her Bible pressed against her chest. Beside her stood Amara Brooks. Amara wore the same navy coat she had worn on the bus from Baltimore. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but her eyes betrayed the sleepless night behind her. She had spent the ride staring out the window, one hand holding the repaired photograph of Naomi Brooks and baby Amara, the other clenched in her lap. Samuel Reed had not come with them. He had gone to contact his son and retrieve the copy of the old trip log. Elsie hated walking into that room without him, but Daniel Pierce had told her the will reading could not wait. "Are you sure we should be here?" Amara whispered. Elsie looked at the double doors ahead. "No." Amara turned to her. Elsie gave a tired, honest smile. "But the truth does not always wait until we feel ready." A receptionist opened the doors. The conversation inside stopped. Meredith Ashford sat near the head of the table in a black suit and pearls, her posture flawless, her grief now shaped into authority. Preston stood behind her chair, speaking quietly with two lawyers. Claire Ashford Vale sat near the windows, pale and rigid, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Daniel Pierce rose when Elsie and Amara entered. "Mrs. Whittaker, Miss Brooks, thank you for coming." Preston turned slowly. His eyes moved from Elsie to Amara, then to the Bible in Elsie's arms. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "she brought the actress." Amara stiffened. Elsie reached for her hand. "Do not answer him yet." Meredith sighed, as if wounded by the unpleasantness forced upon her. "Preston, please." But her eyes never left Amara. Daniel cleared his throat. "They are here at my request." After reviewing the scanned documents Mrs. Whittaker sent to my office, I determined their presence was necessary before the estate proceeds. One of Meredith's attorneys leaned forward. "With respect, Daniel, a scanned letter from a former employee does not create standing." "Perhaps not," Daniel said, "but it creates questions." Preston laughed softly. "Questions? My father is in the ground less than 48 hours, and this woman arrives with a mystery daughter from Baltimore. We all know what kind of question this is." Amara's chin lifted. "What kind?" Preston looked at her, as if she had no right to speak. "The kind poor people ask when they smell money." The words struck the room like glass breaking. Claire closed her eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened. Meredith only lowered her gaze, performing sorrow. Amara turned pale, but she did not sit down. "I did not come here for money," she said. "Of course not," Preston replied. "You came for truth. That is what people say when they do not want to sound greedy." Elsie stepped forward. "She did not even know your father's name until yesterday." "And whose fault is that?" Preston shot back. "Yours? Did you need time to coach her?" Meredith raised one hand. "Enough. This is painful for everyone." Then she looked at Amara with soft, poisonous pity. "Young lady, I do not know what Mrs. Whittaker promised you. I do not know what story she told you about my husband. But money belonging to the dead should not be chased by the living through lies." Amara's eyes glistened. Elsie felt her tremble. At the far end of the table, a board member whispered to another. Someone glanced at Elsie's worn shoes. Another looked at the Bible as if it were a prop. Elsie recognized the look. She had seen it in the chapel, at the gate, in every room where rich people decided poverty was evidence of dishonesty. Daniel opened a folder. I will read the relevant portion only after confirming the documents in question. Meredith's attorney stood. Before that, we need to address the source. Mrs. Whittaker entered a private funeral uninvited, carrying what she claimed to be family documents. She was removed by security. She has since refused to surrender materials belonging to the estate. Elsie said, "The letter was given to me by a dead man who cannot confirm it," the attorney replied. Preston placed a document on the table. "And we have something more reliable than a servant's memory." Daniel looked at him. "What is that?" "A statement from 20 years ago." Preston slid the paper forward, signed by Claire Ashford Vale. Claire's head snapped up. Preston continued. "It confirms that Naomi Brooks left Connecticut voluntarily, accepted financial assistance, and had no child recognized by Harrison Ashford." Meredith did not look at Claire. She did not need to. Her control filled the space between them. Daniel picked up the page and read silently. Elsie looked at Claire. "Is that true?" Claire's lips moved, but no sound came. Preston smiled. "There it is. The truth. Naomi Brooks was a paid companion with a fantasy. Mrs. Whittaker either believed the fantasy or improved it." Amara whispered, "Do not talk about my mother like that." Preston leaned both hands on the table. "Your mother, if she was your mother, took money and disappeared. That is what the record says." Amara flinched as if he had struck her. Elsie's anger rose so sharply she could barely breathe. "Records can be made to lie. So can old women," Preston said. The room fell silent. Daniel turned to Elsie. "Mrs. Whittaker, I need the original letter." Elsie opened the Bible, removed the plastic-wrapped envelope, and placed it in his hands. Meredith's face did not move, but her fingers tightened around the armrest. Daniel studied the handwriting, the seal, the date. "This will require forensic authentication. Until then, I cannot treat it as legally conclusive." Meredith's attorney seized the opening. "Then we should adjourn and remove these individuals from the premises." Preston nodded toward security near the door. "I agree." Amara took one step back. Elsie felt the old helplessness return. The same cold weight from the chapel steps. Then the conference room doors opened. An elderly man entered, soaked from rain, one cheek bruised purple, his cap clutched in his hand. Samuel Reed. In his other hand was a worn folder. "I am sorry I am late," he said, breathing hard. "Someone tried to make sure I did not come." Meredith stood. "This is a private estate proceeding." Samuel looked at her for the first time, without lowering his eyes. "I drove the car that night, Mrs. Ashford. I drove Naomi Brooks and her baby away from your house." Preston snapped. "He is a disgruntled former driver." Samuel opened the folder and placed a copied logbook page on the table. "Then ask why your mother's signature is on the trip record." No one moved after Samuel Reed placed the copied trip log on the conference table. For a moment, even the rain against the glass seemed to quiet. The old driver stood near the door, one hand gripping the back of a chair, his bruised cheek swollen, his coat still dripping onto the expensive carpet. He looked nothing like a man who had come to destroy a billionaire family. He looked like a man who had carried a secret until it had hollowed him out. Preston Ashford was the first to recover. "This is ridiculous," he said. "A photocopy from a bitter former employee is not evidence." Samuel looked at him. "I expected you to say that." Preston stepped toward him. "You were dismissed by this family years ago." "I retired," Samuel said quietly. "You were paid generously." "I was paid to drive, not to lie." Meredith's face remained composed, but Elsie saw the smallest change in her hands. Her fingers had tightened around the edge of the table. Daniel Pierce reached for the copied page. "Mr. Reed, may I?" Samuel nodded. Daniel adjusted his glasses and read the page in silence. The room watched him. On the paper were columns filled in by hand. Date, time, vehicle number, destination, purpose, and authorization. The date matched the one in Harrison's letter. The destination listed a private airfield outside White Plains, followed by Street Agnes Hospital, Baltimore. In the authorization line was a signature, Meredith Ashford. Daniel looked up. "Mrs. Ashford, is this your signature?" Meredith let out a slow breath. "It appears to resemble mine." "That is not an answer," Elsie said. Meredith turned her eyes toward Elsie, as if noticing a servant had spoken at dinner. "Mrs. Whittaker, I would be careful. Grief and desperation have already led you into dangerous territory." Amara stepped forward. "Do not threaten her." Preston laughed. "There she is, the brave hidden daughter. Tell me, did Mrs. Whittaker teach you that line on the bus ride from Baltimore?" Amara's face burned, but she held his stare. Daniel raised a hand. "Enough." He turned back to Samuel. "Do you have the original log?" Samuel swallowed. "It was stolen from my car yesterday. Someone smashed the window outside the clinic in Baltimore." "How convenient," Preston said. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a second folder. "That is why I had my son send the copy I mailed him years ago. He is a postal inspector in Virginia. He received it 14 years ago, after I had a health scare. The envelope still has the old postmark." The room shifted again. Preston's confidence faltered for only a second, but Elsie saw it. Daniel took the second folder. Inside was a scanned image of an old envelope, a notarized statement from Samuel's son, and copies of several logbook pages before and after the date in question. "This establishes chain of custody for the copy," Daniel said. Meredith's attorney leaned forward. "It establishes that a former driver kept personal records. It does not establish paternity, inheritance, or misconduct." "No," Daniel said. "Not alone." He turned to the conference phone. "Bring in the archive files I requested." Meredith's eyes sharpened. "What archive files?" Daniel looked at her. "After receiving Mrs. Whittaker's scans, I asked the estate office to pull all documents connected to the initials AB Trust." Preston stiffened. Meredith said, "There is no such active trust." "I did not say active," Daniel replied. The door opened, and a young assistant entered with a banker's box. She set it beside Daniel and left quickly, sensing the danger in the room. Daniel removed a folder labeled Ashford Private Instruments, 2004. Inside were old legal drafts, memos, and financial transfer forms. He searched until he found a thin packet clipped together with a rusting paper clip. His expression changed. "What is it?" Amara asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. He placed the packet on the table. "AB Trust," he said. "Created by Harrison Ashford Sr. 20 years ago. Initial beneficiary listed only by initials. AB." Preston snapped. "That could mean anything." Daniel turned a page. The draft includes a handwritten note from Harrison. Full name to be supplied when child is legally acknowledged. The air went cold. Elsie closed her eyes. Amara whispered, "Child?" Meredith stood. Those were drafts. Harrison made many drafts. He was sentimental and medically unstable. Claire Ashford Vale suddenly made a small sound from her seat near the window. Everyone turned. Her face was wet with tears. Meredith's voice dropped. "Claire." That one word carried 20 years of command. Claire stared at the table. "No." Meredith went still. Claire stood slowly, her hands shaking. "No, I cannot do it again." Preston's face hardened. "Sit down, Claire." She looked at him with a grief older than fear. "I signed the statement you showed earlier." "But it was not the truth." Meredith's attorney rose. "Mrs. Vale, I advise you not to speak without counsel." Claire laughed through tears. "Counsel? Where was counsel when I signed away a baby's existence?" Amara's breath caught. Claire turned to her. "Your mother did not leave freely. Naomi was terrified. Meredith said she was protecting the family. She said Harrison was confused. She said Naomi had to disappear before the press found out. She covered her mouth for a moment. "I signed because I was afraid my children would lose their inheritance. That is the truth. I was a coward." Meredith's face hardened into something almost inhuman. "You are emotional." "I am guilty," Claire said. "That is different." Preston pointed at Amara. "This proves nothing about her." Amara finally stepped away from Elsie. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "You keep talking about proof like I am a forged check. I am a person. My mother left me one half of a photograph and a message telling me not to believe she sold me. Mrs. Whittaker brought the other half. Mr. Reed brought the date. Your own files brought the trust." She looked directly at Meredith. "How many pieces does a life need before people like you stop calling it a lie?" The silence that followed was deeper than shame. Daniel closed the trust packet and looked at his assistant. "Contact Street Agnes Hospital, records. Request preserved birth files under the number in Harrison's letter. Also prepare a petition to delay estate distribution pending forensic review and DNA testing." Preston's voice rose. "You cannot freeze the estate based on this circus." Daniel met his eyes. "I can if there is credible evidence of an omitted heir." At that moment, the assistant returned, breathless, holding another sealed envelope from storage. "This was in the foundation transfer file," she said. Daniel opened it and removed a copy of a transfer form. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. He laid it flat on the table. Beneficiary status: deceased. Authorized transfer of A.B. trust assets to Ashford Legacy Foundation. Signature: Meredith Ashford. Amara stared at the word deceased. Elsie reached for her hand. Meredith said nothing. For the first time, she had no polished sentence ready. The room did not explode after the transfer form appeared. It froze. For 20 years, the Ashford family had survived by controlling the pace of truth. They softened ugly things with legal words. They buried pain under charitable language. They turned people into files, files into errors, and errors into silence. But the word on the page was too plain to soften. Deceased. Amara Brooks stared at it until the letters blurred. Elsie Whittaker tightened her hand around Amara's. She could feel the young woman shaking, not with weakness, but with the terrible force of someone realizing that her life had not merely been hidden, it had been officially denied. Daniel Pierce set the transfer form beside Harrison's letter, Samuel's copied trip log, and the old trust packet. He did not speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice had changed. It was no longer the careful tone of an estate attorney managing a family dispute. It was the voice of a man who understood he was looking at something much darker. "We will proceed in order," Daniel said. Preston leaned forward. "There is no proceeding. You have a pile of old paper and a woman nobody can verify." Daniel looked at him. "That is exactly what I intend to do, verify." Meredith sat back down, her face pale but controlled. "Daniel, be careful. You are allowing emotion to distort procedure." "No," Daniel said. "For the first time today, procedure is protecting someone without power." The words landed heavily. He turned to his assistant. "Call Dr. Elaine Porter from the document examination firm. Put her on speaker." Within minutes, the conference phone crackled. Daniel explained that a preliminary review had already been requested based on the scans Elsie sent from the church. The original letter now lay sealed in a protective sleeve. Dr. Porter's voice came through calm and professional. "The handwriting in the scanned letter is consistent with known samples from Harrison Ashford Sr., including personal notes from the same period. I cannot issue a final report without physical testing, but based on stroke pattern, pressure variation, and signature formation, I see no immediate indication of forgery." Preston's mouth tightened. Daniel asked, "And the date?" "The ink and paper must be tested in person, but the stationery appears consistent with Ashford private correspondence from roughly 20 years ago." Daniel thanked her and ended the call. Then he placed one finger on Samuel's trip log. The date in the letter matches the date in Mr. Reed's records. Vehicle number 4A, destination White Plains Private Airfield, then Street Agnes Hospital in Baltimore. Authorization signature, Meredith Ashford. Meredith's attorney stood. That signature has not been authenticated. Daniel nodded. It will be. But we also have supporting records. He opened another file pulled from the archive box. Fuel purchase, driver meal reimbursement, private airfield access fee, all billed to the Ashford household account on the same date. Preston said nothing. Amara looked at the papers, then at Meredith. You sent my mother away. Meredith's face hardened. Young lady, you do not know what your mother was. Elsie's voice cut through the room. Her mother was a nurse. A mother, a woman scared enough to leave half a photograph behind because she knew people like you would rewrite her. For once, no one corrected Elsie for speaking. Daniel moved to the next file. The hospital record number listed in Harrison's letter was requested from Street Agnes. Their current system shows an infant female marked deceased, but there is no attached death certificate, no burial record, no attending physician's death note, and no matching state death registration. The room went silent again. Claire covered her mouth. Daniel continued. A preserved backup record shows the infant was originally listed as live birth, female, mother Naomi Brooks. The status was changed weeks later. Amara whispered, changed by who? Daniel looked at the page. The request came through an administrative account tied to outside legal correspondence. We will need a subpoena to trace it fully. Everyone understood what he did not say. Meredith turned toward the windows, her profile rigid. Then Daniel lifted the AB Trust document. Harrison created this private trust the same month. The draft beneficiary was identified only by initials A.B. A handwritten note states, full name to be supplied when child is legally acknowledged. He placed the transfer form beside it. Years later, the trust assets were moved into Ashford Legacy Foundation under the claim that the beneficiary was deceased. Amara slowly lowered herself into a chair. Deceased. That word had stolen her father, her inheritance, her history, and the truth of her mother. Daniel's voice softened. Miss Brooks, there is one final step. We cannot complete legal recognition today without full process, but I requested an expedited kinship DNA comparison against Harrison's preserved medical sample from his final hospital stay. Preliminary results have just been delivered to my secure portal. Preston stood. You had no right. As a state counsel, Daniel said, I had an obligation once credible evidence of an omitted heir emerged. He opened his laptop. No one breathed. Daniel read the result once, then again. His face changed, not with surprise, but with solemn certainty. The preliminary analysis confirms a direct biological relationship between Harrison Ashford Sr. and Amara Brooks, consistent with father and daughter. Amara closed her eyes. Elsie felt the young woman's hand go limp in hers. For a moment, Amara did not cry. She simply sat there, as if her body could not decide whether truth was a rescue or another kind of wound. Then the tears came. Not loud, not theatrical. Just one hand over her mouth, one hand over Naomi's photograph, as 20 years of namelessness cracked open inside her. Daniel stood. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, turning to Elsie. I owe you an apology. Elsie looked up. I believe this might be confusion, or grief, or manipulation. I was wrong. You did not steal estate documents. You preserved evidence of a person this family tried to erase. Elsie's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. I never wanted anything from them. I know that now. Elsie took Harrison's letter from the table and placed it gently before Amara. This belongs to you, she said. It never belonged to me, and it never belonged to them. Amara opened the letter with trembling hands. Harrison's words waited on the page, old and ashamed. My daughter Amara is not the mistake of my life. She is the child I was too weak to protect. Amara bent over the letter and wept for a father she had never known, and for a mother who had died under a lie. Elsie stood beside her, small, old, and finally seen. People think power keeps the truth, Elsie said softly. But sometimes the truth is kept by someone who has nothing left but a promise. Daniel closed the file. This matter is no longer only about the will, he said. It concerns falsified records, misdirected trust assets, concealed identity, and possible long-term financial misconduct. Meredith did not move. Preston looked toward the door, as if escape had suddenly become a legal strategy. But there was nowhere left for the Ashfords to hide. The girl they had marked dead was sitting at their table, holding her father's letter in her living hands. The hearing was held 3 days later, inside the main hall of the Ashford Legacy Foundation. It was the same room where Meredith Ashford had once hosted luncheons for hospital donors, scholarship ceremonies for underprivileged students, and charity panels about dignity in aging. The walls were covered with photographs of smiling children, grateful nurses, and elderly residents sitting beside Ashford family members who had learned how to look compassionate when cameras were near. That morning, the cameras were there again. But this time, they were not filming generosity. They were filming the collapse of a lie. Elsie Whittaker entered slowly with Amara Brooks at her side. Samuel Reed walked behind them, leaning on a cane. Claire Ashford Vale followed with her lawyer, her face pale and bare of makeup. At the front of the room, Daniel Pearce stood beside a table stacked with files, sealed reports, and certified copies of records from St. Agnes Hospital. Meredith sat at the witness table in a grey suit. She looked elegant, cold, and almost untouched by the storm around her. Preston sat 2 seats away, unable to hide his anger. His phone was face down on the table, but it had buzzed so many times that morning that everyone knew what was happening outside the room. Banks were calling. Board members were distancing themselves. Reporters were asking why the future CEO of Ashford Coastal Holdings had failed to disclose that the estate might contain an omitted heir. Daniel Pearce began with a simple statement. Based on authenticated documents, preserved hospital records, trust files, and preliminary DNA findings, Amara Brooks has been established as the biological daughter of Harrison Ashford Sr. Until all court procedures are complete, distribution of the estate will remain suspended. A murmur moved through the hall. Preston shot to his feet. This is outrageous. The board chair, a retired judge named Marion Bell, looked at him over her glasses. Sit down, Mr. Ashford. Preston remained standing. My father was not in his right mind when any of this happened. That letter proves guilt, not legal intention. Daniel turned a page. The letter is only one piece of evidence. The AB Trust establishes financial intention. The DNA establishes biological relationship. The hospital records establish concealment. The transfer form establishes that assets intended for AB were redirected after the beneficiary was falsely marked deceased. The word deceased passed through the room like a blade. Amara did not flinch this time. Meredith folded her hands. I acted to protect my family from a predatory situation. Elsie looked at her. For decades, she had watched Meredith speak that way. Soft words, clean words, words that made cruelty sound like management. A baby was predatory? Elsie asked. Meredith's eyes flicked toward her. Mrs. Whittaker, you are not qualified to understand the pressures that surrounded this family. Elsie smiled sadly. No, ma'am. I only cleaned up after them. Someone in the back of the room lowered their eyes. Claire was called next. She stood, swore her statement, and gripped the edge of the table as if the floor might disappear beneath her. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. I signed a false statement 20 years ago, Claire said. I said Naomi Brooks left freely and that there was no child Harrison intended to acknowledge. That was not true. Naomi was frightened. Meredith controlled the lawyers, the household, and access to Harrison. I was told that if I refused to sign, my children and I would be cut off from the family. Meredith did not look at her. Claire turned toward Amara. I cannot ask you to forgive me. I only want the lie corrected. Amara held her gaze. Correction does not erase what it cost. Claire broke down then, not dramatically, but completely. Her lawyer helped her sit. Samuel Reed came next. The old driver moved slowly to the table, his cap in both hands. "I drove Naomi Brooks from the Ashford estate," he said. "I saw the baby. I heard Naomi crying in the back seat. She kept saying she had not sold her child. I kept the trip log because some part of me knew the truth would be needed one day." Daniel asked, "Why did you remain silent?" Samuel lowered his head. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of losing my pension, afraid a family like Ashford could ruin my son's future." He looked at Amara. "My silence protected me and harmed you. I am sorry." Amara nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Then Daniel presented the consequences. Preston Ashford was suspended from all executive succession proceedings, pending review of his financial representations to lenders. The Ashford Harbour Residences project, already unstable, would be audited. Any loan agreement relying on undisputed inheritance control would be re-examined. Meredith was removed from all active authority within Ashford Legacy Foundation. The matter of altered hospital records, misdirected trust assets, and false beneficiary status would be referred to civil investigators and probate court. The Foundation's board ordered an outside review of every trust transfer connected to Harrison Ashford's private estate. Preston slammed his hand on the table. "You are destroying this family." Amara stood. "No," she said. "You destroyed a woman's name. You erased a child. You used hospitals, lawyers, and charity accounts to make a living person disappear. This is not destruction. This is what happens when the floor you built over a grave finally cracks." The room went silent. Daniel then turned to Elsie. "Mrs. Whitaker, the board has asked that you be seated at the front table for the remainder of these proceedings." For a moment, Elsie did not understand. All her life in Ashford rooms, she had stood behind chairs, carried trays, cleared plates, and left before speeches began. Now a staff member pulled out the seat beside Daniel Pierce. The seat of honor. Elsie walked to it slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. She sat down with Harrison's letter resting before her. She looked at Meredith, then Preston, then the board. "I did not keep that letter to destroy this family," Elsie said. "I kept it because this family destroyed a mother and a child, then asked the world to call it legacy." No one answered. Elsie continued, her voice quiet but clear. "Naomi Brooks deserves her name back. Amara deserves her records corrected. And every old worker who gave their life to this family deserves to know they will not be thrown out like trash when they become inconvenient." Marion Bell nodded. "Those reforms will be entered into the Foundation's emergency resolution." Outside, reporters waited. Inside, the Ashford name had already changed forever. At the end of the hearing, Daniel closed his file and made one final announcement. A memorial service for Naomi Brooks will be held in the Ashford Chapel this Sunday. Elsie looked up. The same chapel, the same doors, the place where she had been dragged into the rain. This time, Naomi's name would be spoken from the front. On Sunday morning, the rain finally stopped. The Ashford Chapel stood beneath a pale Connecticut sky, its white stone walls washed clean, its stained glass windows catching the first thin light after days of storm. 3 days earlier, Elsie Whitaker had been dragged through those same doors like a thief. Her shoes had scraped across the marble, her coat had been soaked through, her name had been whispered with pity, suspicion, and shame. Now the front doors were open, not the staff entrance behind the kitchen, not the narrow side door used by gardeners, drivers, and housekeepers. The front doors. Amara Brooks stood beside Elsie at the bottom of the chapel steps. She wore a simple black dress and a dark coat borrowed from a woman at the Baltimore clinic. In her hands was the framed photograph, 2 torn halves joined together at last. Naomi Brooks stood in the Ashford garden, young and frightened, holding baby Amara wrapped in blue. Elsie looked up at the doors and stopped. Amara felt it. "Are you all right?" Elsie gave a small nod, but her eyes were full. "For 40 years, she said softly, "I came into this place through the back." Amara slipped her arm through Elsie's. Not today. They climbed the steps together. Inside, the chapel looked different without the mountain of white roses and the practiced grief of the Ashford funeral. There were no television cameras at the front, no rows of powerful men waiting to praise a billionaire. No security guards blocking the aisle. On a small table near the altar sat Naomi's photograph, Harrison's letter, a white candle, and a vase of blue hydrangeas. Elsie had chosen the flowers herself. Naomi had once said blue was the color of peace, though peace had never been given to her in life. People turned as Elsie and Amara entered. Some had been present at Harrison's funeral. Elsie recognized their faces. The board members who had looked away, the foundation donors who had whispered, the attorneys who had treated her old hands as evidence against her. This time, when their eyes met hers, they lowered their heads. Meredith Ashford sat in the last pew. She wore black again, but the silk and pearls could not restore what had been stripped from her. She no longer sat in the family row. She no longer controlled the foundation. Her lawyers had advised her not to speak. For once, Meredith's silence did not feel powerful. It felt empty. Claire Ashford Vale sat 2 rows ahead of her, weeping quietly into a handkerchief. Samuel Reed sat near the door with his cane resting across his knees, the old triplog folder beside him like a witness that had finally learned to speak. Preston was not there. His suspension from Ashford Coastal Holdings had become public that morning. Banks had frozen review of the Harbour Residence's financing. His name, once spoken as the future of the family, was now tied to audits, investigations, and questions he could no longer answer with arrogance. Daniel Pierce stepped to the front. His voice carried through the chapel, steady and formal. Today, we gather not to protect the reputation of the Ashford family, but to restore the name of a woman who was denied dignity in life and in death. Naomi Brooks was a nurse, a mother, and the mother of Amara Brooks, the biological daughter of Harrison Ashford Sr. Amara's grip tightened around Elsie's hand. Daniel continued, "The record has been corrected. The false notation of death attached to Amara Brooks has been challenged and withdrawn, pending final court order. The AB Trust has been frozen and will be restored under court supervision. Naomi Brooks will no longer be referred to in foundation records as an unknown claimant, companion, or private matter." He paused. Her name was Naomi Brooks. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amara stepped forward. She placed the repaired photograph beside the candle. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "My mother died before I could ask her why she left me," she said. "For most of my life, I thought silence meant abandonment. Now I know silence can be forced. I know records can be changed. I know powerful people can make a living person disappear on paper." She turned toward the back of the chapel, toward Meredith. "But I am here. My mother's name is here, and the truth is here." Meredith looked down first. After the service, Daniel handed Amara the final certified copy of Harrison's letter. Elsie watched as Amara read the first line again, the same line that had shaken the chapel open. "For my daughter, Amara." Amara pressed the letter to her heart. "I thought this would make me feel rich," she whispered. Elsie smiled sadly. "Did it?" "No." Amara looked at Naomi's photograph. "It makes me feel real." Weeks passed. The Ashford Legacy Foundation announced an independent review of every private trust transfer connected to the family estate. Meredith faced civil investigation over the false beneficiary declaration. Claire gave sworn testimony. Samuel's statement became part of the probate record. Elsie's cottage was offered back to her with an apology written by lawyers. She refused it. Instead, she moved to Baltimore. Amara found a small house with a front porch, 2 bedrooms, and enough sunlight for Elsie's sewing chair by the window. It was not grand. The paint peeled near the steps. The kitchen floor creaked. But the key belonged to Elsie, and no one could take it back with a phone call. Amara kept working at the community clinic. With the restored trust funds under court supervision, she established the Naomi Brooks Home Fund to help mothers pressured by powerful families, workers discarded in old age, and young people searching for records that had been hidden from them. On the first evening in the new house, Amara placed Naomi's photograph and Harrison's letter in a small frame on the mantel. Elsie sat by the window, watching the sun settle over the street. "Did you ever want to give up?" Amara asked. Elsie looked at the letter, then at the young woman who had been marked dead and still found her way into the light. "Many times," she said, "but every time I wanted to let go, I remembered that poor people can still keep what rich people lose." "What is that?" Elsie reached for her hand. "Conscience." Outside, children laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere down the street, a church bell rang. For the first time in 20 years, Elsie Whittaker did not feel like the keeper of a secret. She felt like the keeper of a promise finally fulfilled.